Welcome back. In today's lesson, we're going to be doing our summarizing exercise on everything we've talked about in JavaFX. Now this means we're going to be doing a case study in which we'll create a clock pane class. The case study is going to involve developing a class that displays a clock on a pane. Therefore, we want to be able to have the hour, minute, second, width, and height of the pane, and we want to have the appropriate getter and setter methods. We want to have two constructors, the clock pane noarg constructor with the current time, and the constructor with for a specified time. Then we need to be able to set the current time. Now in today's lesson, all we're going to be doing is implementing the clock pane class. We're going to be displaying it. We're not going to be implementing the class itself. We'll do that in the next lesson. So let's get started. We're going to create a new Java project. And since this is the easier part of the two lessons, it's not going to be too long either. It's going to be called display clock. And then inside display clock, we're going to create a new class file. We're going to call this display clock, since the actual class itself is going to be called the clock pane class. It's going to have the main method, in which all we're going to say is application.launch with the args the arguments that we provide. In addition, it's important to note that when we do this, only this class is going to be extending the application class. The other class will not. The other class will just extend the clock pane class so that it can implement it that way. Now we can import the application class. That's going to be stored into the JavaFX.application. After that, we have to make sure inside, before we forget it, after that we have to make sure we import, or we have to extend the application class so that we can override the start method. So, before we forget to do it, we're going to say extends application, and then we're going to have our override annotation, and then we're going to say public void start with the stage primary stage. Then we can leave the method, and we'll improve upon this later on. Now remember, we still have to import a lot of classes. We're going to have to import the geometry class, the position class inside the geometry class, that is, which is the JavaFX.geometry.position, or pos. Then we have to import the stage class, which is stored in the JavaFX.stage.stage. Then we have to import the JavaFX.scene.scene. Then we have to import the label and border pane classes. So we'll first do the label class, which is stored in the JavaFX.scene.control.label. And finally, we have to import the JavaFX.scene.layout.borderPane. Now that we've created all of these imports, we can now create an instance of the clock pane class. Now remember, we're going to have quite a few errors today because, once again, we haven't actually implemented any of these methods or the class itself, so we'll have a couple of errors, but those will go away once we actually implement the clock pane class. So we're going to say clock pane clock is equal to a new clock pane. Then we need to be able to get the current time as a string. So we're going to say the string time string is equal to the clock.getHour, which will allow it. It's a method that we're going to be creating, which allows us to get the current hour. Then we're going to add in a colon to indicate that we have the hour. Then we're going to add in the minute by saying clock.getMinute. Then we're going to add in another colon to indicate that we have another space. And then we're going to say the second. So we're going to provide clock.getSecond. And with that, we're actually done, since this is the entire string we had to create. So after that, we can now create a new label. This label is going to be called LBL current time. You could call it label current time, however, in the interest of space, we're not going to. It's going to be equal to a new label with the time string. This time string is the time string we've created here, And the reason we have this is because we need to be able to create a label object that represents the current time at the bottom of our program. So to do that, we have to create a new border pane, since if we want something to be stuck at the bottom of a program, or of our of the window, we have to make sure we have the border pane, and we have to align it to the top center, then we have to set it to the bottom. So we're going to say border pane, pane is equal to a new border pane. No arguments on that. Then we're going to say pane.setCenter clock. That is the clock object we've created up here. And then we're going to say we need to set the label current time to the bottom of this pane. So we're going to say pane.setBottom, and then we provide our label current time, or LBL current time. And finally, we have to align everything. So we're going to say border pane.setAlignment, and this is a static method, which is why we're using the full class name. Our child is going to be the LBL current time, and the value is going to be the position, which is why we imported that position class, .top_center. This is because we need to make sure that it is lined up to the center of the screen, the time. Even if the time is at the physical bottom, it needs to be lined up with the top of the screen. And then finally, we just have to create our scene and display the stage. After that, we're actually done with this implementation, and in the next lesson, we'll be talking about how to actually implement the clock pane class. So we're going to say scene is equal to a new scene, and that's going to be passed the pane, and a size. The size is going to be 250 by 250. Once again, because it's a border pane, it'll automatically resize, so you can change the size based on what you're dealing with. But in our case, the default size, and it's a good size for a clock, is just going to be 250 pixels by 250 pixels long. Then we're going to have the primary stage, and we're going to set its title to display clock. And then we finally have to set the scene by saying primary stage dot set scene, and then we provide our scene that we've created. And finally, we have to show this by saying primary stage dot show. Now the only error we have here is because we actually haven't created the clock pane class, but once we create it, that error will go away, and we'll be able to actually display an appropriate clock. Now it's important to note that our goal here is not to display a live clock. Our only goal here is to be able to create a clock for the current time. If you wanted to display a current clock, that would be a slightly more complicated program, since every new second it would have to create a new clock object. But for now, we don't need to do this, so that's the end of today's lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about how to actually implement the clock pane class. To summarize, in today's lesson, we just created a driver class for the clock pane class we're going to be creating in the next lesson. Hopefully you found today's lesson useful, and hopefully you stick around to the next lesson where we'll actually implement the clock pane class.